Las Vegas is confronting an invisible enemy, one that threatens the survival of every one of its 2.3 million residents and the 40 million tourists who pass through it every year. The threat is not a lack of water, not a financial collapse, not a societal breakdown. It is the air itself. Air so hot it is becoming a weapon, a relentless, suffocating heat that has been building for decades, silently turning the city into a sprawling urban oven. And now, that oven is approaching a temperature that science and biology agree is a hard limit, a point where human bodies simply fail. Not in some distant theoretical future, not in a decade, now. Before we go deeper, tell us in the comments, what's the highest temperature you've ever experienced? The answers might be more telling than you think. This is not a forecast, it is a diagnosis. The city is running a fever, and there is no simple cure. An incredible number of you who watch these deep dives forget to subscribe. If you value this kind of analysis, take 1 second and hit that button. It's the single best way to ensure we can keep making them. Let's begin. Las Vegas was founded on a defiance of nature, a monument to human will in a basin that should have never hosted more than a railroad stop. But the forces it defied are now coming to collect. The city that gambled on its own existence is now facing a house that never loses: the laws of physics. To understand the crisis facing Las Vegas, you first have to understand the monster it created. The urban heat island effect. It is a phenomenon known to every major city on Earth, but in the Mojave Desert, it has been perfected into a catastrophic art form. A city is not just hotter because it is in a hot place. A city makes itself hotter. It is an engine of its own thermal destruction. Concrete, asphalt, glass, the holy trinity of modern construction. And in Las Vegas, they cover nearly every square inch of the valley floor. During the day, these materials act like a sponge for solar radiation. A black asphalt parking lot, covering acres of what was once reflective desert sand, can reach surface temperatures of 170 degrees Fahrenheit on a summer afternoon, hot enough to cause second-degree burns in seconds, hot enough to literally cook food. Then nightfall. But the city does not cool. That stored energy, absorbed by miles of roads, millions of square feet of dark rooftops, and endless concrete surfaces, begins to radiate back out into the air. Where the desert's natural cycle of cooling is broken, the heat that should dissipate into the atmosphere is instead trapped, held close to the ground by the very geometry of the city. Tall buildings create urban canyons, preventing breezes from flushing the heat away. The day's thermal load becomes the night's ambient temperature. There is no relief. The cycle repeats, day after day, week after week. Each day starts from a higher thermal baseline than the one before. The heat is cumulative. It has a memory. And then there is the city's own metabolism, the waste heat. Every air conditioning unit fighting to keep a hotel room at 72 degrees when it's 115 degrees outside is a pump. It pulls heat from inside and vents it directly into the open air. Multiply that by millions of units. Residential homes, commercial towers, sprawling casino floors, and twice were those sprawling nantams, an invisible exhaust of pure thermal energy pouring into the atmosphere 24 hours a day. The very machines used for survival are active contributors to the problem they are trying to solve. It is a perfect, self-reinforcing feedback loop. A city trying to cool itself is only making its environment hotter. Scientists from the Desert Research Institute have measured the difference. A drive from the undeveloped edges of the valley to the heart of the strip can show a temperature increase of 10, 12, even 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The city is its own furnace, a sprawling, inefficient, and increasingly dangerous machine for generating and trapping heat. We're just scratching the surface of this thermal trap. What part of it do you think is most overlooked? The black rooftops, the endless roads, the waste heat from AC? Let us know your thoughts below. This wasn't an accident, it was a choice. Or rather, a series of choices made over decades when the climate was more forgiving and the consequences seemed distant. The architectural language of post-war Las Vegas was one of cheap land and cheaper energy. Single-story homes with poor insulation, vast unshaded parking lots, and a road network designed for cars, not people. The materials used were the ones that were fastest and most economical to build with, not the ones that were best suited for a desert environment. That legacy is now baked into the city's concrete foundations, a structural flaw that cannot be easily fixed, a design for a world that no longer exists. Las Vegas was not built for this heat. It was not ready. The heat in Las Vegas is not an inconvenience. It is a public health emergency. And it is a crisis that does not affect everyone equally. It has cleaved the city in two. There is the Las Vegas of the tourist, a hermetically sealed corridor of climate-controlled casinos, hotels, and ride-shares. An artificial reality where the oppressive outdoor temperature is little more than a number on a phone, an amusing detail to mention to friends back home. For them, the heat is a novelty, a brief, shimmering wall you pass through between the airport and the hotel lobby. That city works. It is engineered for comfort at any cost. Then there is the other Las Vegas, the city where 2.3 million people actually live. And within that city, the lines of exposure and vulnerability are drawn with brutal clarity. For a construction worker on a high-rise project, a landscaper maintaining a median, or a roofer patching a roof in July, the heat is not a number. It is a physical assault. It is a constant, life-threatening presence they must endure for 8 to 10 hours a day. Their bodies are the front line in this battle. And they are losing. Emergency room visits for heat-related illnesses like heat stroke and heat exhaustion have been climbing steadily for a decade. The numbers spike in perfect correlation with the heat waves. More days above 110 degrees means more people arriving at hospitals in distress. It is a direct and predictable equation. But the most vulnerable are often the most invisible. The elderly resident on a fixed income, living in an older, poorly insulated apartment. For them, a decision as simple as turning on the air conditioner becomes a complex financial calculation. Can they afford the spike in their electricity bill? The fear of a bill they cannot pay leads them to endure dangerously high indoor temperatures, often with tragic consequences. Or the city's homeless population for whom there is no escape, no air-conditioned refuge. They live within the heat island 24 hours a day. Shade is their only defense, and it is a resource in desperately short supply. The city designates cooling centers, public buildings with air conditioning where people can find temporary relief. But this is not a solution. It is a bandage on a gaping wound. A reactive measure for a problem that demands a systemic overhaul. The existence of cooling centers is an admission of failure. It is the city acknowledging that parts of its own environment have become unlivable. This is a reality for millions. If you think this is a story that needs to be seen and understood, please like this video and share it with your family. It's more than just a weather report. It's a warning about the future of cities in a warming world. The economic cost is just as severe. The strain on the electrical grid is immense. On peak summer days, the demand for power in southern Nevada reaches levels that push the system to its absolute limit. Brownouts and blackouts are no longer a theoretical risk. They are an annual threat. Imagine a city of millions at 118 degrees, and the power goes out. The air conditioners fall silent. The refrigerators stop humming. The very systems of life support shut down. It is a doomsday scenario that keeps utility managers and emergency planners at the NV Energy Control Center in a state of constant vigilance. They are fighting a daily battle against physics and demand, rerouting power, but managing loads and praying that a critical transformer doesn't fail under the unprecedented strain. One failure could cascade through the system with devastating speed. The city that lives on spectacle discovered it had a profound vulnerability. The heat wasn't just dangerous. It was bad for business. Tourists walking the strip in extreme heat suffer exhaustion. Outdoor events are canceled. The very image of Las Vegas as a playground is threatened when the environment itself becomes hostile. So the city began to fight back. Not with one single grand project like the water tunnel, but with a series of smaller, quieter, and equally desperate interventions. The city started painting itself a different color. The strategy was called cool pavement. The premise is simple. Dark asphalt absorbs up to 95% of the sunlight that strikes it. A specialized coating, a grayish-white emulsion of asphalt, water, and reflective polymers can flip that equation. Instead of absorbing the heat, it reflects it back into the atmosphere. The city of Las Vegas, in partnership with Clark County, began a series of pilot projects, coating miles of streets in residential neighborhoods and commercial districts. The results were immediate and measurable. Surface temperatures on the treated roads were 30 to 35 degrees cooler than the untreated blacktop beside them. The air temperature just above the surface was several degrees lower. It worked. But like every solution in this unforgiving environment, it came with complications. The reflected sunlight, no longer absorbed by the road, had to go somewhere. Pedestrians reported a noticeable increase in glare and radiant heat. The heat wasn't gone. It was just being bounced around. Furthermore, the coatings were expensive to apply and required regular maintenance to retain their reflective properties. Scaling the program to cover thousands of miles of roads in the Las Vegas Valley would be a monumental undertaking, costing hundreds of millions of dollars. It was a step in the right direction, a powerful proof of concept, but it was not a silver bullet. It was another piece in a much larger, more complex puzzle. The city was learning that you could not simply engineer the heat away. You had to redesign the city itself. I know we mentioned it before, but if you're finding this valuable, please take a moment to subscribe. I'll only ask one more time, I promise. Maybe. Seriously though, it helps us continue these deep investigations into the critical issues shaping our world. The second front in this war was an old one: trees. The simplest and most effective technology for cooling a city ever invented. A healthy tree canopy can reduce ambient temperatures by as much as 20 degrees. The shade prevents solar radiation from hitting the ground, and a process called evapotranspiration releases water vapor into the air, acting as a natural air conditioner. The city of Las Vegas launched an ambitious initiative to dramatically increase its tree canopy, particularly in low-income neighborhoods that suffered the worst effects of the heat island. The goal was to create cool corridors, tree-lined streets that would provide safe, shaded routes for pedestrians and cyclists. But here, Las Vegas ran headfirst into its other existential crisis: water. Trees need water to survive, and in the Mojave Desert, water is the most precious commodity of all. The very region that so desperately needed the cooling effects of a lush tree canopy was the same region that was under severe, mandatory water restrictions. The Southern Nevada Water Authority, the same agency that drilled the third straw, had spent 2 decades convincing residents to tear out their lawns and replace them with desert-friendly landscaping. Now the city was telling them to plant trees. It was a paradox born of 2 competing environmental crises. The solution to one problem directly exacerbated the other. Planners had to get smarter. They focused on planting drought-tolerant native species like mesquite and palo verde. They developed advanced irrigation systems that delivered water directly to the root ball with minimal waste. But the fundamental challenge remained. Growing a mature tree canopy in a desert takes decades. It is a long-term investment in a city that is facing a short-term emergency. They planted thousands of trees, and still the concrete footprint of the city grew faster. They established new parks, and still the average annual temperature continued to climb. It was a race against time and thermodynamics, and the city was struggling to keep pace. The interventions were real. The commitment was genuine. And it still was not enough. Every new building, every new subdivision, every new warehouse built on the outskirts of the valley represented a new set of choices. Were they being built to the standards of the past or the standards of a much hotter future? Clark County began to update its building codes, mandating cool roofs made of reflective materials on new commercial constructions. They encouraged the use of better insulation and more efficient windows. But these rules largely applied to new builds. The vast majority of the city's building stock, millions of square feet of homes and businesses, was constructed before these codes were in place. Retrofitting an entire city is an economic and logistical impossibility. The city was fighting a war on multiple fronts. With chemistry, by changing the color of its roads. With biology, by planting trees. With policy, by changing its building codes. Each effort was a small victory, a testament to the city's refusal to surrender. But the enemy was not the asphalt or the lack of trees. The enemy was the sun, and the sun was getting stronger. The most unnerving truth is buried in the climate models. The data that scientists at institutions like NASA and NOAA use to project the future of the planet. For the American Southwest, those models are not ambiguous. They are terrifyingly clear. The region is on a trajectory to become hotter and drier. The heat waves that Las Vegas is experiencing now are not anomalies. They are the new baseline. The future will be worse. Significantly worse. The models predict that by mid-century, the number of days per year over 110 degrees Fahrenheit could double, or even triple. Heat waves will not only be more frequent, but they will last longer and reach higher peak temperatures. The worst-case scenario of a decade ago is now being discussed by climatologists as the likely scenario. And within that data lies a concept that represents a true physical boundary for human survival. A threshold beyond which no amount of resilience or adaptation matters. It is called the wet bulb temperature. It is not the same as the air temperature you see on a weather report. It is a combined measure of heat and humidity. It represents the lowest temperature that can be reached through evaporation. In other words, it's the point at which our primary cooling mechanism, sweating, stops working. When the wet bulb temperature is too high, the air is so saturated with moisture that sweat cannot evaporate from the skin. The body has no way to shed heat. Core temperature begins to rise uncontrollably. This is not a matter of discomfort. It is a matter of physics. Extended exposure to a wet bulb temperature above 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 degrees Celsius, is unsurvivable for a healthy human, even in the shade. For most of its history, Las Vegas has been spared this specific threat by its extreme dryness. The heat is intense, but the low humidity allows for efficient evaporative cooling. But that is changing. Climate change is not just making the region hotter, it is making it more volatile. Shifting weather patterns are bringing more moisture into the desert from the Gulf of California and the Pacific. The monsoon season is becoming more erratic. The result is the emergence of a new and far more dangerous kind of heat. Hot and humid. This is the third and final time, I swear. If you've made it this far, you are clearly one of us. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next investigation. The support truly keeps this channel alive. Scientists have tracked rare but increasing instances of high wet bulb conditions in the region. So far, they have been brief and have not crossed the lethal threshold. But the trajectory is clear. As global temperatures rise, the risk of a catastrophic wet bulb event in the Southwest is no longer zero. It is a tangible, statistical probability. What would that mean for a city like Las Vegas? It would mean that for a period of hours, or even days, the simple act of being outside would be fatal. Cooling centers would be overwhelmed. The power grid would be pushed to the breaking point. The city would have to go into a complete lockdown, a thermal quarantine. It is a scenario that is almost too grim to contemplate. Yet it is one that emergency planners are now being forced to quietly consider. The engineering that built Las Vegas can install cool pavements and plant trees. It cannot change the fundamental principles of human biology. Las Vegas is not an island. It is the most acute symptom of a much larger disease, a crisis of heat that is enveloping the entire globe. Phoenix, just a few hours' drive south, is arguably in an even more perilous position. Cities across the Middle East and South Asia, like Dubai and Jacobabad, have already recorded some of the highest wet bulb temperatures in human history, pushing the very limits of what their populations can endure. The lessons being learned in the brutal heat of the Mojave Desert are not just for Las Vegas. They are for every city that will face this future, a future where shade is infrastructure, where water is life, and where the air itself can no longer be taken for granted. The city of Las Vegas made its name by building fantasies, palaces of plaster and light in the middle of a barren expanse. It sold a dream of endless possibility, of luxury without limits. Now, it is being confronted with the stark and unforgiving reality. The reality of a planet that is warming. The concrete that formed its foundations has become a liability. The sun that was once part of its allure has become its greatest adversary. The story of Las Vegas heat is not over. It is a story being written in real time, in degrees of Fahrenheit, in emergency room statistics, and in the quiet,